Pricing and Incoterms.
While domestic pricing is based on a company's production costs and market strategy, setting prices for foreign markets introduces significant challenges due to additional logistical and regulatory expenses. These include international shipping, special packaging, customs, and taxes. The core difficulty lies in managing these added costs and risks across great distances, prompting key questions about how companies handle these negotiations, who bears the responsibility for each cost, and who assumes the associated risks in a global marketing context.
Incoterms.
Incoterms are foreign trade rules that describe 11 different trading terms, establishing aspects of responsibility, obligations, rights, and costs for both parties in an international trade transaction. These rules were created by the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, parting from the revised American Free Trade Definitions, RAFTDs. Incoterms intend to establish a globally accepted standard that allows the assignation of the rights and obligations all parties in an international transaction have and the chance to solve conflicts, serving the ultimate purpose of achieving free and smooth international trade. These terms simplify the negotiations between providers and clients, since they provide definitions that are known and accepted worldwide. According to Teo, 2023. Incoterms are essential in the logistics process and related to the transportation of goods.
Incoterms 2020.
According to the Incoterms 2020 edition, 11 types of Incoterms are kept, classified into two groups. Rules for any mode of transport, EXW, FCA, Captain, CPI, DPU, DAP, DDP. Rules for inland and waterway transport, FOB, FAS, CIF, CFR. In contrast to the previous Incoterms version, 2010, the following important changes are made. The DAT, delivered at terminal, Incoterm, is replaced by DPU, delivered at place unloaded. This is done to emphasize that the delivery point for merchandise does not necessarily have to be a terminal, so the place agreed for delivery must be analyzed to determine if it is suitable for unloading. According to the new regulations, the FCA, Free Carrier, Incoterm allows bills of lading, BL, to be emitted after the merchandise has been loaded. The parties involved can request the UN by mentioning it on board. The CIF, cost, insurance and freight, and CIP, carrier and insurance paid to. Incoterms have new agreements regarding the minimum coverage from cargo insurance. The level of insurance to be provided can still be negotiated between the parties involved. For the CIP Incoterm, the selling party must set the insurance coverage in compliance with the Institute Cargo Clauses A, although the lower level of insurance will still be agreed upon negotiation between the parties involved. The FCA, Free Carrier, DAP, delivered at place, and DPU, delivered at place unloaded. Incoterms now consider that the seller and buyer can perform the transportation of merchandise on their own instead of hiring a carrier. In the 2010 edition, it was assumed that shipments were done by a third party.
Incoterms for any mode of transport.
EXW, ex-works. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods after making them available for the buyer in its premises or in a specified place of the seller's property, such as on site, warehouse, or store. The seller is not obliged to load the goods in a vehicle or handle the export process, when applicable. FCA, Free Carrier. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods to the carrier, or the person appointed by the buyer at the seller's premises or at the designated place. Risks are passed on to the client as soon as the goods are delivered. Captain, carriage paid to. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods to the carrier, or the person appointed by the seller in a place agreed upon by both parties. The seller must hire and pay for the transportation costs needed to carry the goods to a destination that has also been designated by the parties. However, risks are passed on to the buyer once the product is delivered to the carrier. CIP, carriage and insurance paid to. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods to the carrier, or the person appointed by the seller to a place designated by both parties. The seller must control and pay the transportation costs needed to carry the goods to a destination also nominated by the parties, as well as provide insurance that covers damage or loss of goods during transportation. However, risks are passed on to the buyer once the product is delivered to the carrier. The seller is only obliged to buy minimal coverage insurance. The buyer can get a more comprehensive insurance to protect the cargo, since by this point it is considered that the product is the buyer's property even if the transportation and insurance costs have been paid by the seller. DAT, delivered at terminal. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the unloaded goods at the main transportation destination and makes them available to the buyer at the port or designated destination terminal. The term terminal can be used for piers, warehouses, container yards, railway stations, or air terminals. The seller assumes all the risks involved in carrying the goods to the designated destination and in unloading. DAP, delivered at place. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods after making them available to the buyer in the main transportation type and are ready to be unloaded in the place designated by both parties. The seller takes up all the risks involved in carrying the goods to the nominated destination. DDP, delivered duty paid. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods after making them available for the buyer in the main type of transportation, having finished the import proceedings and paid the taxes, so that they are ready to be unloaded at the place designated by both parties. The seller takes up all the risks and costs involved in carrying the goods to the nominated destination and is obliged to fulfill all customs proceedings for exports and imports, as well as paying all the taxes related to the export and import of goods.
Incoterms for inland and waterway transport. FAS, free alongside ship. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods once they are allocated next to the ship designated by the buyer at the shipment port pier nominated by both parties. The risk of loss or damage to the goods is passed on to the buyer when the merchandise is located next to the ship, and from then on, the buyer takes up all the generated costs. CFR, cost and freight. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods aboard the ship designated by the seller at the nominated seaport, and the seller must control and pay the transportation costs needed to carry the goods to the unloading seaport also designated by the parties. However, risks are passed on to the buyer when the product is delivered on board. CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. This trade term indicates that the seller delivers the goods aboard the ship designated by the seller at the nominated seaport, and the seller must control and pay the transportation costs needed to carry the goods to the unloading seaport also designated by the parties. Additionally, it must provide insurance that covers the damage or loss of goods during transportation. However, risks are passed on to the buyer once the product is delivered on board. The seller is only obliged to buy minimal coverage insurance. The buyer can get a more comprehensive insurance to protect the cargo, since by this point it is considered that the product is the buyer's property even if the transportation and insurance costs have been paid by the seller. The price set by the seller in each of these terms considers the additional costs absorbed. That is, the more delivery activities the seller must pay, the more the price will be affected.
Rights and obligations. The fundamental role of Incoterms, international commercial terms, in global trade. Incoterms are standardized rules that clearly define the responsibilities, costs, and risks for buyers and sellers during the shipping process. Two key functions of these terms. Allocating costs and tasks. They specify which party is responsible for paying for and carrying out each logistics activity, like transportation, customs, and insurance. Transferring risk. They establish the exact point where the risk of loss or damage to the goods passes from the seller to the buyer. This is crucial because the party holding the risk at the time of an incident is the one who suffers the financial loss and must file any insurance claims. Finally, a direct link between Incoterms and pricing. When a seller agrees to an Incoterm that requires them to pay for more activities or bear more risk, often requiring more comprehensive insurance, These additional costs are factored into the final price quoted to the buyer.
Pricing methods. Pricing is not a logistics-exclusive activity, but it is nonetheless linked to it. There is no standard method to set the price of a product. The decision is influenced by an infinite number of factors that are added to the analysis executed by the person who makes the decision. In other words, if a certain element is considered important for setting prices, it must be considered. Because of this, there is no specific method to follow. Each product, industry, and company must determine their own product strategies. Once the above has been understood, it is necessary to know the influence logistics has on the establishment of prices. Aside from the strategies specific to marketing such as market behavior analysis, competition monitoring, production cost plus desired contribution margin, among many others, there are methods that involve different logistics factors. Prices set by area are derived from the logistics costs the selling company incurs, in addition to the base price that already exists for the product. When the seller must be responsible for movement costs, customs proceedings, loading, unloading, storage, fees, it is common for prices to be set according to the areas in which deliveries have to be made, including the cost for reaching the place, to standardize the price with regional competitors. Prices set by freight costs view each case separately, adding all additional costs derived from delivering merchandise to a base price. They can vary depending on the order's density or weight, distance, time of the year, and other factors. Prices set by volume consider the efficiency a company can have in terms of logistics costs, depending on the sales volume it has with a certain client. When the client purchases large amounts, it is possible for the selling company to get a discount from carriers, allowing it to offer a more competitive price than other clients with smaller amounts. Coordination between logistics and marketing is important to establish prices. Marketing studies the market, understands its needs so that the product can be bought, and determines the price clients would pay using surveys, market research, and competition analysis, etc. Logistics determines the costs to pay while manufacturing the product and the accumulated costs to deliver it to the client. In other words, logistics determines in real terms what price can be set, based on the cost structure of production and product distribution. When the price set by logistics is similar to the one set by marketing, the needs of the company and the needs of the market can be made even, increasing the chance of successfully selling the product.